So we're starting a brand new message series today called Bless This Home, and we are blessed to have access to great videos like this from Life Church, and I hope that you'll be blessed. It will be a blessing to you and your home as well as we go through this series over the next 4 weeks together. Because everyone wants to have a home that is blessed, a family that is blessed. No one wants to feel like their family is cursed. Sometimes, though, I think blessed isn't the first adjective that comes to mind when we think of our family. Sometimes I think there are lots of challenges that can come to mind when someone says, how is your family? Like blended families can present a challenge. Single parent families can present a challenge. Living as a single adult and as your own family can be a challenge. Foster care and adoption is a challenge to our families. Starting a family is always a challenge. Financial problems can be a challenge in family life. Marriage is always a challenge. No matter how good your marriage is, if your marriage is not a challenge, you're not doing it right. So it should be challenging to you to have to give yourself fully to someone else for every day of your life. So if marriage is not challenging to you, then it's probably really, really challenging to the person you're married to. It's probably really, really challenging to be your husband or be your wife. So it's always a challenge. Raising teenagers is a challenge. Being a teenager is a challenge as you learn to transition from being a child to relating to your parents in a different way as sort of an adult, a kind of adult, almost an adult, and so no matter who you are or what kind of family life you have right now or you come from, family in general can be really challenging. And it sometimes can feel like our families can be more challenged and more cursed than blessed, I think. And in this series, we're going to focus on one particular teaching of Jesus in the Bible and apply it to our homes and to our families. The teaching is from Matthew chapter 5. It's the Sermon on the Mount. That's Jesus' most famous sermon. We're going to center in on probably this most famous section of that sermon, which is called the Beatitudes. Now, Beatitudes is just a really old school churchy word that just means blessedness or blessings. And so it's just this list of blessings that Jesus goes through. And if you read them carefully, some of the things that you read where Jesus says you're blessed if, they don't really sound like you're blessed. They almost sound more like curses in a way. They seem like challenges. But actually, we're going to learn as we apply these to our family over the next 4 weeks how they can actually be blessings after all. So we're going to focus in on Matthew chapter 5 today, and we're going to look specifically at verse 6, if you want to look there with me. Verse 6 says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So what is righteousness? Righteousness is kind of another old school churchy word we don't use very much. And I like how the New Living Translation translates that word in that same verse, and it translates righteousness as justice, because we kind of understand justice in our culture. Righteousness basically means doing what is right. It means doing what is just. It's doing what is good, doing what you're designed to do, what you're supposed to do. So that hunger and thirst for righteousness is that desire within you that makes you want to live a life justly and fairly and rightly. You want to see that life of justness and fairness and rightness in other people's lives as well. That hunger growls in your stomach every time you see something wrong and you say, that's not fair. That's not right. That shouldn't be that way. That's the hunger and the thirst for righteousness within you. And Jesus says, when you hunger and thirst for the right way of living life, God will fill you. God will satisfy your hunger, because that is what God hungers for as well for our world. God will satisfy your hunger because God hungers for righteousness, and God will get what God wants. Righteousness and justice is at the core of God's gospel message for this world, is that through Jesus, God is making this world right and just and the way it's supposed to be. And in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is announcing that. He's announcing the good news of God's kingdom, that God's world, that God's kingdom is a just world. It's a right world. People act rightly when they live in God's kingdom. People act justly. They are as they should be. They are as God designed them to be. So if you hunger and you thirst for that kind of world, a world where things are right, then you should be happy, Jesus says. You should be happy. You should feel blessed because Jesus is making that world a reality. Jesus has come to make the world right. Jesus has come not just to give us a right world when we get to heaven after we die, and Jesus has come not to just give us a right world when he returns in some future day and brings heaven to earth, but also right now. Right now, Jesus is making the world right. And so we can be blessed as we hunger and thirst for that right world, because Jesus is here now fulfilling that righteous desire. He's filling that desire within us for righteousness, for rightness in our families, and for rightness in our homes as well. So blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So the question we're asking ourselves today is do you hunger and thirst for righteousness, for that rightness in this life and in this world? Do you hunger and thirst for that rightness in your family and in your home? Now, of course, you might say, well, of course, I want to live the right way, and of course, I want our family to be as families are supposed to be. But, okay, but do you hunger for it? Do you thirst for it? When you're hungry, when you're thirsty, that's often the only thing that you can think about. That hunger and thirst consumes you. What you desire to consume consumes you. I need a drink. I need something to eat. And until you get what you crave, you won't be satisfied. When you're hungry, when you're thirsty, your desire to consume consumes you. And so are you consumed in your life with the desire for righteousness in your life and in your family? Or are your thoughts consumed by other things? Is your time consumed by other things? Are you filling your life with things that ultimately don't matter and things that ultimately won't satisfy your hunger? Things will never actually fill you up. Even though they fill your life, they will never fill you up. Maybe the reason your home feels less than blessed is because, if we're honest, most of us are not hungry for righteousness. We're consumed by the urgent in our life. Our families are consumed by things like the urgency of our kids' school schedules, and we're consumed by maybe our own school schedules and assignments, and we're consumed by extracurricular activities, and we're consumed by work, and we're consumed with working out, and we're consumed with finding work, and we're consumed with fantasy football, and we're consumed with Astros baseball, who, by the way, are 2-0 in the division series. We're consumed with taking care of our kids. We're consumed with taking care of our homes. We're consumed with social media at the neglect of taking care of our kids or taking care of our homes. We are consumed, but not satisfied. We are busy, but not full. Our home life is filled with all these things, and yet our lives are not filled with blessings. So Christ desires for our homes and our families to be blessed, for our lives to be filled. And it starts with having this hunger for God and for righteousness in our homes. So we don't want to just be a Christian family. We want to be a Christ-centered home. Because Christ-centered homes, they hunger and thirst for righteousness. But culturally, Christian homes, Christian families, consume a kind of lukewarm Christianity instead, which Jesus doesn't bless. And Jesus actually says in Revelation chapter 3, verse 15, he says, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. So does your version of Christianity in your home, does it look more like hungering and thirsting for righteousness? Or does it look more like lukewarm Christianity? Lukewarm Christianity looks something like this. We say we believe in God, but really we live as if he doesn't exist. And we don't talk too much about God in our home, and our kids seem to act just like every other kid in their school acts, and our marriage looks just like every other marriage we see on TV, and we never read the Bible at home. We don't pray much at home. We certainly don't pray together when we're at home. We go to church some, but we're not really involved or anything in church. We're basically Christian in name only. And if that's who you are, then it's okay. I'm glad that you're here, because this isn't a place that only welcomes the super Christians that have everything perfect and right. If that's you, it's okay for today. But I want to challenge you to something greater, something more blessed. I want to challenge you to get hungry for the righteousness of God, for something more satisfying than just the lukewarm Christianity that might be pervading your home. So I want to challenge you to a more blessed home as you change from this consumption of lukewarm Christianity to a hunger for God in your home. Because honestly, when you think of lukewarm things, who is really satisfied with stuff that is just lukewarm? The only people that I know that are ever satisfied with lukewarm food our children, kids, right? And I like my food like scalding hot, like very, very hot. My kids make fun of how hot I like my food, but they only like lukewarm, disgusting food. And I've served my kids hot chocolate before, right? It's a chocolate. They should like it. Knowing that they don't like hot foods, intentionally, I take a sip beforehand just to make sure it's not too hot, it's not going to burn their mouths before I give them the cup of hot chocolate. And it never fails. What they'll do is they'll take a sip and they'll spit it right back out and they'll say it's too hot. I said, I thought you said you wanted hot chocolate. I guess you wanted lukewarm chocolate. Next time you need to order lukewarm chocolate. And I'll give it because they like it so cold that the Swiss mix doesn't even mix. Right? It's too cold. And so, in addition to lukewarm foods, my kids and your kids probably too, they seem to not just like lukewarm food, but they like really bland food. Most kids don't like very spicy food. They don't like the variety of flavors they find in vegetables and other things and spices. So that basically there's only 3 food groups that I've discovered for children that they really like. They like starches, like breads and crackers and chips and stuff. Starches, the cheese food group, and the sugar food group. Starch, cheese, does that sound like about your kid? So it's such a bland and boring and lukewarm diet. Don't you wish your kids would eat healthier? And don't you wish that you didn't have to fight with them about eating something outside of those 3 food groups that they like so much? And wouldn't it be easier if they just liked those healthy foods, if they just had an appetite for them, if they just hungered for the good foods that you're trying to serve them? So what if I told you there was actually a way to change your kids' appetites, to change what they were hungry for? What if I told you you could help change their diet from that lukewarm, bland diet that they like so much, that pervades your home, to a more nutritious diet of healthy food that fills and that satisfies? If I told you that, then I know that you wouldn't believe me. And I know that you would give me an excuse, say that your kid is different. You'd fall into this defeatist mindset and say, Andrew, that might work for your children, but not my children. My children are different. And you see, that shows that we all do this in all of our culture. We have a defeatist mindset that pervades our culture. It's called terminal uniqueness. There's a term for this, terminal uniqueness. And that means that we won't even try to change sometimes. We feel like we're terminally destined not to be able to change. We won't even try to change because we feel like we are unique, that everybody else can change, but I can't change. We can't change. And that's a lie. That's just a myth that our culture believes that keeps us down. And you and your kids are not beautiful and unique snowflakes. Your appetites can change. What you're hungry for in life can change. There is even a science behind this, and that you can change your appetites. And I know this to be true, and you know this to be true because you've already experienced this in your life, because you were the ones who trained your children to have a lukewarm and bland diet. It's your fault. It's my fault. We did this to our own kids. We parents were the ones who trained them in this way to like these foods because we didn't want to burn their little baby mouths. So we cooled off all the food to make sure it was just lukewarm, and then we fed it to them when it was lukewarm. And we didn't really like to cook vegetables for ourselves so much, and so we didn't bother feeding vegetables to our kids. And we went out to eat, nothing on the kids' menu was ever healthy or nutritious for them, so we fed them a steady diet of chicken McNuggets and mac and cheese and Sprite. And we wonder why they have the 3 food groups of starches and cheese and sugar. We trained them in this way. We serve them their food. We prepare them their food. We buy them their food. If anyone is to blame for their lukewarm and bland diets, then it's got to be us parents. Which sounds like really bad news. But in fact, it's actually very good news. Because it means that we've already trained our kids in one way, so now we can actually train them in another way. We actually have the power to help train them to enjoy all the good and healthy and delicious food that God has provided for us and them to enjoy. And this isn't just true for kids. It's true for all of us. All of us, that we can change our appetites. We can change what it is that we're hungry for. But this message is not just about food. That's the thing. It's about a hunger and a thirst for God, and how to create a home that hungers and thirsts for God. Because when we hunger and we thirst for God, then we find fulfillment and we find blessing in our home and in our families. So let's talk on how to train your appetite to change. Not, of course, just your appetite for food. That's fine. But we also want to, more importantly, train our appetite for righteousness and for God in our home. So here are 3 ways I want to give you to create a home that hungers for God. Number 1 is to clean house. So you clean out your pantry, right? You throw out the junk. You stop buying the junk in the first place that fills your pantry with stuff that's never going to satisfy anyway. So your mantra when you go to the grocery store, right, is if it doesn't go into my buggy, it won't go into my belly. Okay? You can say that, right? You can remember that? If I don't put it in my buggy, I won't put it in my belly. It makes it so easy not to eat the bad junk food that never satisfies when there's not any options but good food that satisfies. You know, it makes it really easy to reach for the healthy snack when there are only healthy options within reach. Kids and adults both, we're so tempted by just what we see. But if kids never saw the temptation, if they never saw the fruit snacks, they wouldn't be begging you for the fruit snacks all the time. The only day I'm ever in my whole life tempted to eat a donut is when I'm at church. And there are donuts here, right? Because they're not at my house, so I'm not tempted to eat them. The more we reach for a healthy snack, the more that healthy food will become part of our habit. You know, when you talk about sugar as the food group, sugar is said to be more addictive than cocaine. There's a reason that soda is called Coke. And there's a reason that they stopped serving Coke with cocaine in it because they didn't need to, because the sugar was addictive enough. So if you start eating enough foods that are right, then you'll stop craving the foods that are wrong. And anyone who's ever stopped drinking soda can attest to that once you stop, your craving stops eventually, and somebody serves you that Dr. Pepper that you used to love and that tasted so sweet, and you say, oh, it doesn't taste good anymore. It's too sweet. So if you change your appetite by cleaning house, by getting rid of the junk, then you actually make room for the good foods in there. It's the same with developing an appetite for righteousness and a hunger for God, that if you clean the craziness out of your calendar, you make room for Christ. If you clean the craziness out, you make room for Christ to enter into it. So what stuff do you need to clean out of your life? What stuff do you need to clean out of your schedule? What activities are you consuming that are really just junk, that don't help you to live a satisfying and a rich life? What activities are you involved in that's just cluttering up your life? Do you really need to sign up for one more extracurricular activity? Do you really need to volunteer for one more volunteer position? Do you really need to watch that much Netflix or TV or sports or whatever? Is some of that stuff that fills our schedule just junk that is cluttering up our life, that is filling our schedule but not fulfilling our lives? If you want to create a home that hungers for God, then you've got to first clean house. The second thing you got to do is to add good to the meal, or you can think about adding God to the mix. So sometimes our diets aren't just terrible, right? Sometimes we're not filled with junk foods in our diets. It's just maybe that you don't fill your plate with enough good stuff. And you may just need to add something good to what you're already eating. You may have a relatively healthy plate of food, but maybe you're just a little short on the vegetables, so you need to add some more vegetables to it. Maybe you can sneak a little more vegetables into the chili sauce or into the spaghetti sauce or something like that. And developing a hunger for God doesn't mean that we have to starve ourselves of all the stuff that we're eating today. Sometimes we're doing really fun things. Our activities are good and our schedules are filled, and none of that stuff is bad. But sometimes we just need to bring God along with us into those activities. We need to invite him to be a part of the fun things that we're already involved with. And so add God to the mix. Add Christ to your calendar. What are the things that you're already doing, the things that are already consuming your time, and how can you add Christ into that? So add prayer throughout your day. Those times when you're having a conversation about how beautiful the sunset is, you don't just have to talk about the sunset, but maybe you form that in the form of a prayer. Thank God. Thank you, God, for that sunset that you've made. And when you actually say that out loud, then you're praying with your family. You're inviting him into that moment. Because when you involve God more in the conversations you're having, which will help your kids and your family, your home, to see God involved in your life. So look for opportunities to add God into your daily conversations. Talk about God at the dinner table. It's a great time to do it. I've included a link in the Bible app for you for some great dinner time devotionals that are not really super spiritual or anything like that. You will really enjoy them if you check them out together. When you're trying to make a decision involving what to do in the house, and you're just having a conversation, include God in that conversation, in that decision-making process. What do you think God wants us to do? Talk about that with your spouse and with your kids. Involve God in your extracurricular activities. Maybe there's some things in your life that really are very good, and maybe they are junk, but they can still be redeemed by you bringing God with them. So not all extracurricular activities are bad or anything like that. I'm not saying that you should stop playing all sports or stop being involved in music or anything like that. No. But what can you do to find a way to bring God into those activities? Maybe you can start to, maybe you're instead of just going to the ball field, your church can sponsor the team at the ball field. Maybe instead of just sitting up in the bleachers with the parents and playing on your device, you can put your device away and you can just silently pray for the other parents that are there in the bleachers with you. Find a way that you can bless the other parents that are sitting there at that activity with you. And when you go to work, you don't have to leave God at home either. You can take God with you into the workplace. Maybe you need to learn to view your job not just as a job, but as a ministry, no matter what it is. Learn to view your job as a way that you can serve people, in the way that God is using you to bless other people, to minister to people, to be a light in darkness in their lives in some way. You get to be a source of good news to those people you interact with at your place of work. So add God to your job. Every day is bring your God to work day. And the third thing to do is to number 3, keep going. So don't give up. Don't give up. If you really want to change your appetite for something, it takes more than just one new meal. Oh, I tried that. I tried asparagus once in my life, right? And I didn't like it. Really, when did you try it? Well, I tried that one time when I was a kid, 40 years ago. Well, maybe it's time that you try it again. Maybe you give it another shot. Maybe try cooking it in a different way or something like that. If you're going to develop a hunger, an appetite for something that's new, then it can't be new anymore. It can't be a new food. You've got to have something that you try over and over and over again, and eventually you might just acquire that taste for that food that you originally didn't like. Sunday, and she said, "Dad, where are we going to go to church on Sunday?" Because in her mind, she knew that it's Sunday and you go to church on Sunday. It didn't matter to her that we were going to be 4,000 miles away from our church. She never even crossed her mind to think that we would not go to church together as a family on a Sunday. So you've got to add Christ to the mix. You've got to keep going once you do that, because in a Christ-centered home, you just keep going. You keep going. When your prayers don't get answered, you keep praying. When you're giving, 10% over and over and it just doesn't make any sense for you, you keep giving. And when you're serving and you're tired of serving, you just keep serving. And then you wake up and you realize one day that you just can't live any other way than that. You look up and you want to give and you want to serve, and it's like this hunger inside of you, this thirst that only God can fulfill. Before you know it, your appetite has changed because a long time ago you made the decision to try to hunger. Cleaning house, and you committed to adding God to the mix, and you committed to just keep going. And now you just can't stop. So let me pray for us today. God, thank you for the blessings that you've given our families, the way you've poured out goodness in our life, the incredible love that you have for us. Thank you that you long for a right relationship with each one of us. So help us to develop a hunger for you, a thirst for you, a desire for a right relationship with you. Help us to develop a yearning for a righteous home for all of our family members.